Hello everyone, welcome to Indian Economy by Aman Soni. In today's news, we shall be discussing the important articles related to economy from the Hindu newspaper. In page 1, $1 trillion scope for digital economy, says Prime Minister Modi. During the BRICS Business Forum, the Prime Minister has said that the digital economy in India has the ability to develop to almost a $1 trillion market. And he quoted the statistics saying that out of all the 70,000 startups that are currently in India, there are more than 100 unicorns. And there are investment opportunities in this digital economy sector, especially after the pandemic, in terms of healthcare, telemedicine, or in the education sector, or in the new emerging technologies like the Internet of Things, 5G, and the investment in the national infrastructure pipeline, adding that the emerging areas such as the space, blue economy, green hydrogen, drones, geospatial data, and clean energy sectors. All these sectors have ability to develop in the future and thus improve the Indian economy. This article talks about the interrelationship between economics and society, how the caste has the impact on the economic transformation, and how economics reinforces the caste system that is currently existing in India. Let's go into the details. These type of articles are important for mains exam because these days UPSC is asking more interrelated subject questions. So this could be an important article for the upcoming mains examination. In India, we have been seeing in the past decades that we have been seeing a concept called jobless growth. On one hand, there is growth happening, but the growth is not creating enough number of jobs. Even in yesterday's news hour, we discussed an example wherein with an investment of 40,000 crores by Adani in UP, it had created just 30,000 jobs because most of the investment was capital intensive and the labor didn't get much of the jobs, and 40,000 crore of investment made only 30,000 jobs in India. The private sector would be more interested in investing in emerging technologies and the changing market trends based on the demand and supply, and that particular article discussed about how the government has to propel the job creation. And this article also talks about the concept of jobless growth, and this just reinforces our yesterday's example wherein the private sector couldn't just create enough number of. At the same time, if we look at the Southeast Asian countries and how China developed, at the 20 years back, 30 years back, we were all at the same level of economic growth. But what happened in these 30 years? Where is China now? Where is India now? So what is the link between economic transformation and other aspects like education, technology, and the societal aspects like. And this particular article discusses about the relationship between economic transformation in India and how caste is impeding the economic transformation. We know caste is a rigid social structure. Because of the rigid social structure, it inhibits certain category of people from coming into the economic freedom, and the disadvantages that have been continuing over the period of time, it would just increase the disadvantages. And this is shown in terms of economics when we look at the data of land ownership, data of business and capital owning communities, and the access to political, social and economic capital. And how does caste involve and affect economics? In rural areas, if we look at the statistics, there in every state there will be certain land owning communities who are the major owners of capital also. So if we combine the ownership of land in the rural areas and the land access ownership inequality, adding to that reducing farm labor productivity and increasing informalization of labor and the elite bias in higher education and the neglect of masses from education, all these lead to the economic inequalities. The author gives the example of Arthur Lewis' model of developmental economics. Arthur Lewis got Nobel Prize for the concept of developmental economics, wherein he said that for any developing country to become a developed country, it has to first accumulate physical capital, and based on the physical capital, the development can happen. He said that we have to invest into physical capital. And William Schultz, he also said that an educated workforce improves the productivity and also increases the entrepreneurship ability. Only when there is ability for entrepreneurship in the economy and there is workforce productivity, and that can be achieved through education, training, and experience. So, with the entrepreneurship ability and the increased productivity, the economy's growth can be doubled and tripled at the same point of time. Then the author gives the example of Southeast Asian countries, and he says that there are certain factors which differed from India and this China and Southeast Asian countries, and that's the reason why there is differential growth between all these countries. And what are those factors? The factors being failure of land reforms, no proper investment in the human capital, failure to invest into rural infrastructure, not able to promote capitalism properly, and the non-industrialization of the rural sector. These are all the main factors which made the difference between the growth of China and Southeast Asian countries on one hand and India on the other hand. So let's go into the details of one by one and look how it impacts the economics. If we look at the land ownership and productivity in India, we would know that the land owning communities in India are very few. There is one of the highest land inequalities in the world in India, and this was mainly caused because of the British colonial policies and how they were during the British time, how the land was assigned to few zamindars and some particular castes which are favorable to British, and over a period of time the land kept changing hands only in those communities and castes. So the inequality roots of this inequality are also with the British during the colonial period, and how the British made artificial distinction between cultivators and non-cultivators, that is laborers on the other hand. And mostly these non-cultivators and non-landholding communities were the lower caste people. So on one hand we can see how the British policies, economic policies implemented the society, that is the caste, and how it increased the existing caste system, because mostly the landowning communities were the high caste people and the laborers were the low caste people. And adding to all that, the productivity of the labor is also reducing. The productivity of the land is also reducing because of various reasons. And even after independence, when we took the land reforms, the lower caste didn't get benefited that much. The land reforms, as we know, is not a complete success. It was partially failure. And it was the intermediate caste who benefited from the land reforms. But the lower caste and Dalits remained excluded from the land reforms. And even the Green Revolution, it was mainly based on technology intervention and high yielding varieties, and that would impact and uplift only those communities which are holding the land. What about the laborers? The Green Revolution also didn't have direct impact on the lower castes or the laborers. And even now the author says land defines social status in India and pride in especially in the rural parts of India. And if we look at the productive capacity of the land, it has been losing since 1990s, and at the same time the value for real estate and construction, it is increasing. So the people who are holding lands at one point of time in the previous times, now they are into the real estate business, and this has continued, this has sustained over generations. It has become inheritance, family lineage, and it has also acts as a speculative capital for them. And the defining movement was the economic reforms of 1990s. Because of the LPG reforms, the farm lobby lost its power. What happened? The surplus in the farm sector could not be transformed into the other sectors. For example, a rich farmer could not invest that amount into capital, into business, and become a capitalist entrepreneur. Only few of the communities could do that, and those communities which are already in the business sector, they put barriers for this farm land holding communities to come into business. And adding to that was the historical neglect of the landholding communities from the education, because earlier their occupation was mainly based on farming. They neglected education, and now after 1990, after the LPG reforms, they couldn't use the farm surplus and enter into other business. And that is the reason the author says we are seeing agitations by Jats in Haryana and Punjab, the Marathas in Maharashtra, the Patels in Gujarat. All these are landowning communities, but they are demanding reservation because the earlier agriculture surplus that they had, they couldn't transform that into business capital and become entrepreneurs. And that is why they are asking the reservation for higher education and in this was the impact of land ownership and reducing land productivity. And what about the education? In India, as we know, earlier the education was mainly occupied by the elite caste. The lower caste didn't have access to education. But after freedom, even though the government is trying to give universal access to it, it is still not been universal. As the political scientist Myron Wiener says, India suffered from caste bias in education. It was the elite class who occupied the higher post and the middle income post even during the British period. So inequality in education and access to education, it got transferred into economic inequality because of the differential wages. It is simple common sense. A person with a high skills and high productivity, he gets paid more than an unskilled laborer. So inequality in education gets transferred into the inequality of income because of the different wage rates for the different skill sets and the jobs that people are doing. But at the same time, if we look at the Southeast Asian countries and China, they gradually invested in basic education and then they slowly moved towards higher education. By the time they moved their investments into higher education, the lower education was already very universal. That is why they are successful in manufacturing. And when all these countries focused on low end manufacturing, India was trying to focus on high skilled jobs and high end technology jobs. And when we look at the rural area India, because of the poor human capital, they could not start business venture. So education also led to economic inequality. And finally, the barriers to entrepreneurship. Castes which are already in trading and business, they put barriers for other castes to come into the business. It is obvious in any business, even in any sector, there is something called early mover advantage. A person who goes into that business early compared to other people, he knows the in and out of the business, positives and negatives of that sector. So he would be in a better position than the other businessmen to know about that particular sector and that particular business. The same happened here. The business knowledge kept transferred from generation to generation in those particular castes, and even the agricultural farm caste, the castes which were mainly dependent on the farm surplus, they couldn't transfer their surplus from agriculture and invest into business. Even if some few did, it was just a small margin of people. So the author says, because of the land ownership and land productivity, because of the bias in the education and the entry barriership to the entrepreneurship, the caste, which is the basis for all of this, is leading to economic inequality and it is becoming a hurdle in the economic transformation of India. We can skip this article. It just discusses about the complexity of GST, how and the single slab in GST would help the government in increasing the tax compliance, reducing the litigation, etc. So it has gone too much into the examples. We can skip this article. No option but to raise interest rates, says RBI's Patra. Now, because of the rising inflation, the Reserve Bank now has no option but to increase the repo rate and reverse repo rate to control the. Now there is huge money supply in the economy and there is high demand. So because of the increase in money supply and increase in demand, the inflation is increasing. So if RBI increases the repo rate, So the money supply could be controlled and the inflation could be brought down. And even though this time the inflation is mainly because of the supply side changes, the supply side changes take some time to take effect on the economy. That is why we have to control it from the demand side by controlling the money supply by increasing the repo rate. And this would probably bring the inflation down to tolerance level at least by the last quarter of 2022-23 or the first quarter of 2023-24. India reports increase in current account deficit. The current account deficit of India in the current fiscal year, it rose to 1.2% as compared to 0.9% surplus in the last fiscal year. And the trade deficit also increased to almost $190 billion compared to $102 billion a year earlier. And what are the reasons for that? On one hand, the FDI is increasing, but the increase in FDI is lower compared to in 2020-21, the FDI was almost $44 billion inflow, whereas in the current fiscal year, it is just 38.6 billion US dollars. So you can see the FDI inflow has reduced. At the same time, there is outflow of foreign portfolio because of the increase in interest rate by the Federal Bank of USA. The foreign portfolio investors are going out of India. So the outflow is very high. If you look at the data, in the current fiscal year in 2021-22, it is an outflow of almost $16 billion as compared to an inflow of 36 billion US dollars a year earlier. So you can see the difference. The last year there was 36 billion US dollars of inflow, and in the current fiscal year there is an outflow of 16.8 billion US dollars. Now because of the outflow of FDI, the demand for US dollar increases and the value of rupee depreciates. That is why the value of rupee is also fluctuating. At the same time, the current account deficit and trade deficit is increasing because of the imports of various goods. So if we look at the data, the gold imports compared to last year have reduced. Even the services are in trade surplus as usual, but at the same time, the increase in trade deficit is so high, it is more than the positive gains of both of these. And the increase in trade deficit is mainly because of import of crude oil, coal and the fertilizers. We know because of the coal crisis in India, we are importing more coal, and because of the increase in crude oil prices, the effect on the current account deficit is more. And we also know the fertilizers have to be imported and the prices are getting affected because of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and we are importing at a high price. So all this would lead to imported inflation because the prices of all these commodities are high in the international market. We have to import at those levels. So because we are importing costly goods, the current account deficit and the trade deficit is increasing. We can skip all these articles, they are not important for exam. Here for science and technology, just this headlines is important. Digital variables are vulnerable to the cyber attacks. These are the articles related to economy. Thank you so much.